Mom loved knitting socks, and she obsessively researched and tested every technique she could get her hands on. And like everything else, she also developed a few tricks of her own along the way. Her basic sock book has been the go to reference for countless knitters throughout the years. With Mom, technique always came first. You would be hard pressed to find anyone more schooled in the intricate properties, characteristics, and nuances of any knitting technique, especially when it came to socks. Top down socks were, in her opinion, the only way to knit a sock. A couple of times I managed to get her to teach toe up socks, but they were accompanied by a narrative as to why they were technically inferior, in her opinion. She had very strong opinions when it came to this. She refused to compromise on anything when it came to technique. And knitting two socks at a time, she would call that a parlor trick, and she wasn't into parlor tricks. Double point needles were also her jam, but she was more open minded for those who liked other needle options. Magic loop and two circs may not have been her cup of tea, but if it worked for you, she was fine with that. Fortunately, she left behind videos to illustrate the key techniques used in her sock instruction booklet, starting with the German twisted cast on, through the heel turn, all the way down to Kitchener the toe. For a limited time, we are making her basic sock pattern a free download. If you go to news.swagnit.com, you will find it. And without further ado, here's Mom.
You hold the yarn the same as for long tail, although you will need a somewhat longer tail. You then go under both yarns on the thumb, then down between the strands, bringing the needle back to starting position. Now pick up the index yarn as normal, bringing the needle over and then under the strand. Now see the twist on the thumb strands? Turn the thumb down slightly to untwist the yarns, and bring the index yarn down between these untwisted strands and tighten. Again, under thumb yarns, down between the strands, over the index yarn, untwist the thumb yarn and bring the needle down through the untwisted yarns, and tighten. Hold your needles like this, making sure that there are no twists in your cast on. With the tail in front and your working yarn behind, slip the first stitch on the left needle, this would be the slip knot, to the right needle. Then pull the last cast on over and place it on the left needle, taking the place of the first stitch. Pull on the working yarn to tighten. To divide your stitches for the heel flap, from the beginning of round, work across 1/4 of your stitches, and then place the next 1/2 of your stitches on a holder. I'm using a circular needle for a holder, which I highly recommend. Then move the remaining 1/4 of the stitches to the needle so that you have them divided like so. 1/2 on one needle and 1/2 on a holder. Then turn. Slip the first stitch purlwise with yarn in front and purl across. Turn. Slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in back and knit across. Continue to work these 2 rows, always slipping the first stitch of every row, with the yarn in front on purl rows and the yarn in back on knit rows. On the last row of the heel flap, place a marker in the center of the heel stitches. Slip the first stitch and knit across. Until you are 1 stitch past the marker. SSK, don't forget we slip knitwise on SSKs. Knit 1 and turn. slip the first stitch and purl across. Again into your 1 stitch past the marker. Purl 2 together, purl 1 and turn. Slip a stitch and knit across like before, but now you work until you are 1 stitch before the gap created by the turn. SSK, knit 1 and turn. Slip 1 and purl across. Until you are 1 stitch before the gap created by the turn. Need some more yarn. Purl 2 together. Purl 1 and turn. Continue to work this way, always working to 1 stitch before the gap, decreasing, working 1 more stitch until all of the stitches on both ends are worked. Now we need to pick up stitches along the sides of the heel flap. Begin at the heel, place the needle in the center of the first edge stitch, and pick up the outer loop. Continue to pick up these loops all the way down the flap. Do the same on the other side. Begin at the heel, place the needle in the center of the first edge stitch, and continue to pick up these loops all the way down. You should have the same number of picked up stitches on each side. If you don't, first check to make sure everything has been picked up correctly. If everything is correct but you still have 1 more stitch on the first side, drop the one closest to the heel. This is not uncommon and will cause no problems. With the active needle, work across these stitches along the first side so that they are twisted. For these stitches, we will need to work them through the front loop. You may find it helpful to loosen it like this and then knit it. Work across all of the stitches on this side. With another needle, work across the instep stitches. If you need to close up a hole on this side of the instep, use this ladder to make one. I don't tend to get a hole on this side, so I will just knit across. This is the side of the instep that you are more than likely to get a hole. If you work to make one at the beginning of this needle, also work one at the end on this ladder. Since I don't work the first make one, I just put the ladder on the left needle to set the same as the pickups. And since this side will need to be worked through the back loop, to twist them, I knit the ladder and the pickup together through the back loop. This should close up any hole that will form. Continue to knit through the back loop the remaining stitches along this side. On the same needle, work to center back. And remove the marker. Now you are ready to work the gusset. If you work to make ones on either side of the instep needle, on the first gusset round you will need to decrease those stitches away. At the beginning of the instep needle, work a knit 2 together, and on the last 2 stitches, an SSK. Now we are going to close the toe. First you work the setup. Through the first stitch on the front needle, purlwise, pull the yarn through. Then through the first stitch on the back needle, knitwise, pull the yarn through. Now for the repeat. The first stitch on the front needle, knitwise, and take the stitch off. Through the second stitch, purlwise, and leave the stitch on. Now for the back needle, through the first stitch, purlwise, stitch off. Next stitch, knitwise, and leave the stitch on. Knitwise and off, purlwise, and leave it on. Now for the back needle, purlwise and off, knitwise and on. You will notice that I am no longer pulling the yarn through after taking the first stitch off of the needle. Just go directly into the next stitch and then pull through. It saves a lot of pulling through. Front needle through the first stitch, knitwise and off, purlwise and on. Back needle, purlwise and off, knitwise and on. Notice that I'm not pulling the yarn tightly. Leave it fairly loose and we'll adjust it later. When you only have one stitch on each needle, go through the front needle, knitwise, take the stitch off, the back needle, purlwise, take the stitch off, and you're through. Now we'll adjust these stitches down to the correct size. Put your hand inside of the toe, and with a needle, pull each stitch to make it the right size. The first one I pull a little tight, but the others I leave to match the rest of the knitting. I believe this is the last one, so we'll pull it through, and there's your toe. For the tail, thread it in the tapestry needle, put it through the knitting to the back. And the sock is complete.